To me, there's no question that the greatest NBA player of all time is right back there on my wall. It's Michael Jeffrey Jordan. However, that greatness from the hardwood hasn't translated, frankly, to the front office, whether it be as a general manager or an owner of an NBA franchise. Michael Jordan, as an NBA front office executive, has been boo boo, and there's just no real positive spin I can put on it. He's been bad. He's been terrible. Not quite Elgin Baylor bad, but he was starting to approach that territory. So, over the years, people have had their jokes and they've made their cracks about Michael Jordan and the job he's done or mostly failed to do. And again, there's nothing I can say about it. But I look at this Charlotte Hornets organization and I look at what Michael Jordan's done and the organization that he's put in place have done, and I'm impressed. I see a young Charlotte Hornets team that is definitely on the upswing, that has the potential for even more growth. I love the youth on this roster, the talent on this roster. I love the financial flexibility they're going to have the next several seasons when it comes to the salary cap. And I start to wonder if the Charlotte Hornets are slowly being built by Michael Jordan and his organization into being a future force in the Eastern Conference and maybe potentially even championship contenders down the road. I know it sounds kind of crazy, but hear me out here for a second. You're talking about a team that really doesn't have a lot of bad long-term contracts on the books. They just don't. You look at Al Jefferson. You bring him in free agency. He puts up 21 and 10 last season. You've got him on the hook for this upcoming season for like $13 million. And then I think the year after that, there's a player option for the same amount of money. A lot of teams would love to pay $13 million for a guy to put up 20 and 10. You look at the Wizards, they pay $12 million a season to Gortat to get 13 and 9. Just think about that for a second. Some of the recent first-round picks that they've had, the Biyambos excluded, obviously, but you look at the guys like the Cody Zellers, you look at the guys like the Gerald Hendersons and the Michael Kidd-Gilchrist and the Kemba Walkers, and this year's draft with Noah Venla and P.J. Hairston. They haven't done a terrible job in these recent drafts when they've had multiple picks. They've been able to acquire some nice young pieces for their roster. You've got other veterans in the fold like Gary Neal. You brought in a very underrated, I think, backup point guard in Brian Roberts from the Pelicans. You give him a 2-year deal at like $5.5 million. Again, not breaking the bank to add more depth to your roster. You go sign Marvin Williams in free agency. You give him 2 years. Yeah, you give him like $7-8 million a year. But again, it's nothing long term. And here's a guy that can contribute and do some things off the bench for you in a limited role and be a productive player for you. You go and sign Lance Stevenson in free agency. You give a guy like him, 2 guaranteed years at like $9 million a season, and you're going to get your money's worth, you would think, out of that contract. And again, if something does go south and does go wrong, you haven't handicapped your organization long term with a ridiculously bad 4, 5, or 6 years contract with this guy. I really like what the Hornets have done here over the past couple of off seasons. You're talking about a team this past season that went 43 and 39. They made the playoffs, and that's a step in the right direction. I love the fact that heading into next couple of seasons in free agency, the Hornets are going to have all types of potential salary cap room to play with. I also look at this team from an on-the-court standpoint, and I look at a lineup of like Kidd-Gilchrist, who needs to get better on the offensive end, but is every bit of the outstanding perimeter defender that the Hornets envisioned when they drafted him as high as they did with the second overall pick a couple of years ago. You've got a Cody Zeller who I think could step in and fill the shoes of Josh McRoberts. You've got Al Jefferson, a 20 and 10 guy down low. You've got Kemba Walker, the kind of score first point guard at 24 with some upside still to his game that the league is kind of being built on today. You've got Lance Stevenson. That's a solid starting lineup. That is a playoff contending starting lineup. And I love the fact that the Hornets have some depth on their bench. I think they could go 10, maybe 11 deep, which again is depth that a lot of NBA teams just don't have. You have guys like Gary Neal and Gerald Henderson and Noah Venla and maybe P.J. Hairston and Jeffrey Taylor and Marvin Williams and Brian Roberts. They have a lot of depth. They have pieces in place. And the best thing of all for me with the Charlotte Hornets is that over the next couple of seasons, A lot of these young players are still going to be at a relatively decent cap figure. Maybe you let a couple of guys go. You're able to trade one or two pieces away. Maybe you re-sign Al Jefferson again long term. You're still going to have a lot of money to play with when it comes to potentially hitting the free agent market hard and finding one or two big-time players that you could bring in and really take your Hornets organization to the next level. And I'll say this, for those that'll sit there and say, well, what free agent's going to want to go to Charlotte and what free agent's going to want to do this? Well, let's face it, LeBron went from Cleveland to Miami and then back to Cleveland again. You never say never. Anything is possible. And if the Hornets continue to progress as an organization like I expect them to do this upcoming season, maybe win a few more games and maybe even make some noise in the first round of the playoffs, and perhaps, hell, who knows, maybe even win a first-round playoff series, the thought of Michael Jordan at the top of the organization is not going to be such a bad thing anymore. And a lot of free agents are going to look at this young, athletic team with a lot of depth and say, hey, you know what? I can go there and really make a difference. And if I want to win a championship, this might be a place that I want to go, especially in the Eastern Conference. So I have to give credit where credit is due. I've been impressed with some of the moves that Michael Jordan and his team, his general managers, have put in place over the past couple of seasons, because I really think that the Charlotte Hornets are one of those teams that's flying under the radar that you need to keep your eye on in the next couple of NBA seasons, because they could really shoot up the board and potentially even become contenders in the Eastern Conference. Imagine the thought.